All right. Hello, everybody. How are we? And how is everybody at home? All right. So a couple of just little housekeeping things, and then we're going to jump into our networking talking bit, which is always interesting. Just a reminder, and I will absolutely send you all, Alec, that hair, you look very good from what I can tell, at least from the eyes up, but it throws me off every time I see you. That next week reminder, I mentioned this the other week, but it's going to be asynchronous only. I have a university meeting I have to be at that overlaps with this. So I'll send everybody an email, but it'll be only, I'll record the lecture, and then we'll have time to talk. We'll have time at the beginning of the next section to answer any questions. Related to that, are there any things I know you guys, I posted about a week ago, just the tail end of the stuff about websites and social media and things like that for the marketing things. Does anyone have any questions about any of those things before we, again, move on and dive in? Okay, fair enough. And then also, I'm going to be getting your product articulation things back to you guys all soon. I've been, just to be very candid, I kind of aimed and hoped to get it back to you today, but it's just, honestly, it's really important to me that I give you thoughtful feedback and more than I get it back to you now. So I've kind of, for the past week, been spending about 2.5 hours every day, either recording things or having meetings with people on Zoom, just so, anyway, but I want to make sure I give everybody equal thoughtfulness. But I'll be getting that back to you soon. One thing that did sort of occur to me, and I as I've been continuing to do them this week, and I've been, just thinking about, is that something as you're looking for people to compare yourself to, either to be able to have a shorthand, or just as importantly, because again, it's a lot easier to look at someone else who you're like and see what's true about them than it is to try to figure out what's true about you, is to be looking for people who are not necessarily above the title stars. That you're probably going to find people who are more accurate matches to you who have supporting roles on TV shows, things like that. Because it really is something that, like, movie star is kind of a type unto itself. And there's a lot of people, it's like, well, I'm just like Hugh Jackman. It's like, you know what? Nobody's like Hugh Jackman. Like, that's, nobody's like Hugh Jackman. And it's actually, I think a lot, because I went to school with Bradley Cooper. And I will tell you, as a second-year grad student, before he had ever been in a movie, he was a movie star. He would walk into a room and everyone would stop and look at him. Like, he just has a thing that makes it possible for him to be that giant a person in our cultural imagination. And, it's just that idea that we talk about 99%, that's like the 0.0003% of people who are pursuing this. So it just is one of those things that it can be kind of tough when you're looking at what giant movie star am I most like? That can be really tough. And frankly, especially because, again, most movie stars are movie stars because they're really, really, really specific people. That's what makes them movie stars. And so anyway, that's just a thing to think about as you're considering, thinking about these sorts of things moving forward, is that certainly there may be things you have in common with Julia Roberts. Like, that is certainly a thing that might be true. But if you're looking for someone who's really got what you are like, they're probably more likely to be somebody who's on a TV show you love, or is the person who, plays the third lead in this movie, that kind of thing, just because that's where the absolute vast majority of people who make their living as actors in those roles, rather than as, the person who's on the front cover of Us magazine. So, it's and I think I say that but I think about the other people who I knew before they got famous, and kind of all of them kind of felt famous from the time you first met them, and so it's just a thing to be aware. And actually, there are potentially, I think, people in this class who have the potential to have that thing, but the vast majority of people don't. don't have it. And again, that's not a bad thing or good thing. It's just a matter of like, what are you targeting your career towards, you know? Awesome. All right, so what we're going to talk about today, unless anyone has any questions from home or anything before we jump into today. All right.
Would someone else in the room be able to monitor the Zoom? My iPad's freaking out today.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Mine's been stuck on the loading screen.
All right, so can folks at home see the slide now?
Yes.
Awesome. Again, what we're going to be talking about today is something that I think a lot of times is something that causes a lot of people a lot of anxiety, and that is networking and what that means. It is a really essential part of this business that you are all choosing to go into. Again, I find that useful always to remember that if you've got to go to a party and talk to someone you don't know and that causes you a lot of anxiety, you did that to you. You know, if you were a school teacher in Sheboygan, you would not have to go up and introduce yourself to a casting director at a party. You are the person who chose to pursue the career that requires that. And I think there's at least a certain amount of power that goes along with that. But also, it is anxiety. You know, a lot of people do have anxiety about it. And so we're going to talk today about a combination of sort of philosophical ways to think about it that at least I think will give us a, am I muted? Is that happening?
No,
Sorry.
I just also cannot do it.
Oh.
Why it's not working for me.
Oh, all right. We'll look at that in a second, or maybe I'll just check more frequently. But that, that idea that we're going to talk in a combination of sort of philosophical ideas about ways to think about it that I think will help you to grasp it and to be able to move forward with confidence. And also, frankly, a lot of just kind of like practical advice about kind of how to both start and then manage relationships with people. Because again, there's so many of these things where they talk about workshops, where they talk about networking. It's like, how do you meet this person? It's like, well, yeah, and we'll talk some about that. And honestly, there are other things to talk more about that. But the more important thing is, once you've met them, what do you need to do about it? Because one of the things also you're going to find, especially if you move to a big market, but also frankly smaller markets, if you're swimming around in the theater and film community, you're going to meet people. It's an amazingly small world. You end up running into people if you're going to the theater, if you're going to events at theaters that you like, if you're frankly hanging out at a coffee shop that's near the public theater in New York, there are going to be people you want to get to know, going to pull up at the table next to you. Like, it's going to happen. You know, again, the question is, what is it that you actually do? Sorry, do we have someone in the room who's able to sign? You're able to sign in? Yeah, just so if anybody raises their hand, just because I can't necessarily see it from over here. Awesome, thank you. So let's talk about. Sorry. I test this before class every day, and yet every day the my remote stops working. Oh, I think I know. Ah, did it. Did it? Sorry. So let's talk about the value of building relationships. There's a lot of different things that relationships can do for you and do with you. And part of it is to create yourself an environment of people who you like and trust, who you can be talking about what's going on in your life and career. That becomes a really important part of what you do, because you're out there, you're pounding the pavement, you're meeting people. It becomes really useful to have a network of people who you can, you know, just sort of they understand what you're what you're up against, and there's someone who can talk to you about it. And also people who have information that might be helpful to you. Oh, I've got this big audition with so-and-so. Oh, you need to be prepared. This thing he always does in auditions is so-and-so, so just don't be thrown off by it. Like those sorts of things can be super useful to know. And then, of course, there's the thing about that it can help you to get jobs, which can be really important. We'll talk a lot about that. But, the ways in which the people that you know are going to be connections into getting you work. It also can provide access if you can meet the right person who's part of a group of people that you want to know. That person can help you get to know that other group of people. And it can be a really helpful and important thing. And also, just that idea that people, and again, I used to think it was lazy when I started in the business, that there were directors that would work with the same actors over and over and over and over again. But what I came to discover once I was on the other side of those things is like, there has never in life been a project at any level that had enough time or enough money to get it done in the way they wanted to get it done. It has never happened. The one example of the way of where it kind of happened was when they did Spider-Man and someone almost got killed, and then it was the worst show you can ever imagine. It was, seriously, I saw it, it was every bit as bad as people said that it was. But they spent literally $150 million and shut down a Broadway theater for 3 years while they just tried stuff. That is actually not a good model for getting work done. But as people are working together and I'm sorry, I just was like, am I recording? Because this is 4 minutes in every time. You see, it recurs to me if I'm not recording. Oh, recording. Thank you. I'll just look there from now on instead of going into there. But because there is never enough time, never enough money, people want to work with people who they can count on, who they've established they can count on, who they know are good people, who they know are talented, who they know they can get the work done. And certainly most shows, there's also new people coming into the team and things like that. But there's a lot of times that basically a director is looking for these 4 roles. I want to cast with people I trust. And you need to become one of those people they trust in order to even be considered for those roles. And that's a big part of what it does. Now, there's a lot of ways in which people think about networking is how do I get to people who are ahead of me in the business? And that is definitely part of it. But also, people come up together. That's sort of a phrase from the stand-up comedy. People say, oh yeah, we came up together in the clubs. But again, you want to be thinking about your career as a long game. Again, I think we said this the other day. The goal is not to be on Broadway in the next year. The goal is to be in your 5th Broadway show 15 years from now. Like, if that's what your goal is, to be on Broadway or whatever the equivalent is. And so, for absolute sure, there are going to be people who you get to know who have graduated the same year as you do, a year or 2 later, who 3, 4, 5 years from now are becoming people that actually have some pull in the business for one reason or another. The people who are graduating next year and becoming assistants at the receptionist at the casting agency you're going to for auditions, 2 years from now is going to be a casting associate. 7 years from now is going to be a casting director. And I will tell you for sure, I know people who got cast in things because they get called in by the person who used to be the assistant to another casting director. And as they moved up, they remembered Barry, who was always really cool to them, and they really liked their auditions when they saw them, and they're also a great person. That's a thing that, that absolutely happens. I actually know somebody who was a director, got the first Broadway show they ever directed because 20 years earlier, they had been in a show and there was someone on that show who was a production assistant who they were really nice to. And that person over 20 years became a Broadway producer. And when they were looking for a director, they called in this former actor and said, I know you've been directing. I saw a couple of things you did. Let's come in and meet about this. And that's how they got their first Broadway show, because the PA they were nice to 20 years earlier remembered. And then all the other Broadway shows they got after that trace back to the fact that they were able to prove themselves on that Broadway show. So again, it's just that idea that it's not just the people who are ahead of you. It's the people who are coming up with you that you also want to create a network of relationships with. And part of that is about identifying artists that share your artistic sensibility. Because A, you're going to be self-producing work or participating in other people's self-produced work. I'm not aware of anybody who ever grew up a career that part of their early career and sometimes later career was like working on things that were because someone was putting it up in order to have something to show other people, in order to show their work on. And so you want to be able to create a community of people that are interested in creating the same kind of work that you are. You know, if you're like, I want to do golden age musicals and that's what I want my career to be, well, having a bunch of friends who, you know, who are your professional network that want to be making, you know, gritty Scorsese style films, like that's awesome. They're great people to go get a drink with and hang out with and maybe even live with, but probably not going to be the most useful people to be building up a career, an early career network with. Again, because you're not going to be able to put out the kind of work, even if you do get into the kinds of projects they're interested in doing, it's not going to show off what you're interested in doing. But also, part of the business is the value of a network is being able to have your ear to the ground. That there's a lot of times, like whatever show comes on Broadway, that this is the big new show. Everybody who's in the community in New York has known about this show for 4 or 5 years. You know, they've seen readings of it. They know a friend who was in a workshop of it. Like, people know about these things. And the way they know about these things is because they have a network of people who are involved in those things and tell them about these things that they're working on or that their roommate is working on, and on and on and on and on. But that becomes really important because there are times where, you know, we know they're looking to cast this role right now. When you hear about that through the grapevine, well, that's something that you can chase down because it is possible they will have really cast it in their head before they actually put out the casting call. That happens a lot. But if you know they're in the process of doing that, and you hear it through the grapevine, you might be able to get yourself in a position where you can actually be seen by the director or casting director when they're actually really casting it and not when they put the announcement in the page that they're casting. But again, a group of people that share your artistic sensibility, the people who are likely to be hearing about the kinds of what's going on in the world of the kind of work you want to do are going to be people who are interested in doing the kind of work that you want to do. And also people that share your working sensibility, especially if you're going to be doing self-produced work with these people, which, you know, again, you probably are, you know, people who like to work the same way that you do. I know some really talented people, but just like the way they like to approach a rehearsal process isn't what gets them, that's not where I do my best work. And so it kind of, you know, doesn't make sense for us to be doing a lot of work together. And also, there does become a community of actors and directors who like to work with Meisner. Like, those people kind of start to find each other. Those directors, when you talk about casting people that you feel like are going to be, ahead of time, you think are going to be positive in the room. Well, I know I like to work with Meisner things in rehearsal. I know this is a person who digs working with Meisner. Well, again, if you find other people who enjoy working on Meisner, they can connect you into those other sorts of networks. And again, curating a team of regular collaborators. That again, you are going to have to be out there showcasing your work in different ways, especially early in your career. And so having the ways in which you've got a team of people where it's not like, oh, I want to do a show that's going to show me off. You know, I'm going to invite some agents to. I need to cast out to a bunch of people who I hope turn out to be good. You know, the same way that, frankly, the directors who you're looking to get cast by are going to be looking to have a few ringers in there, people they really know they can trust. It's really helpful, especially if you're spending $10,000 that you don't really have to do a 2-week run of a show, to know I'm doing it with people that I really trust and I know we work well together. But also, as you go up through your career, I mean, the team that did Hamilton, they're working together and have won, the bunch of them have won a bunch of Tonys for the shows they've worked on together. They started working together right out of college. You know, but because the other thing is your collaborators make you better. There are actors I know that I work with that make me a better director when I work with them. You know, there's just the way that we talk to each other, and I know I make them better actors than when they work with other directors. And there's benefit to finding those things and then doing your work together. And again, in some cases, you know, going on, I mean, Scorsese and De Niro started working together in 1972, and they put out a movie last year. You know, people who resonate with each other tend to do really good work together. So it not only can improve your chances of getting work, but it can also improve your work if you find the relationships that you want. And then also finding opportunities for mentorship. This is those relationships with people who are further ahead of you in your career. And they can be people who can give you jobs, but also they can be, there's actually, my friend Carrie Flanagan had a great relationship with an actress who was about 10 years older than her, who was just her type, but Carrie was 10 years behind her. And so she reached out to her and said, I love your work, and I feel like it's the kind of work I want to be doing in 10 years. So they started getting coffee and doing things, and all of a sudden people who would call her, you know, would reach out to this other actor and say, hey, we've got this thing for you, you're playing this 25-year-old. And it's like, yeah, no, I get it, but you do understand I have 3 kids and I'm 37, but I know this great 27-year-old actress, let me introduce you to her. But also, even if that introduction didn't happen, that idea of someone who had been on her career track, really being able to give advice about the pitfalls I found, the big opportunities I found, to give you advice on how to do those things. So again, networking does include finding ways to get in contact with people who can give you work, but much more than that, it's about finding ways to connect up to other people who are in the business and have a variety of relationships with them. And the things that I will tell you is the most important things that I've gotten in my career came to me in very roundabout ways through relationships that I couldn't have expected. That it wasn't like I targeted this person, I got into to see this agent, and I tricked the system, which again is what a lot of these networking kinds of discussions become about. It's like, how do you game the system? It's not. It's how do you make yourself known to people as a good, decent, hardworking, talented person? How do you get the people that it would be helpful to you to know those things about you, to know those things about you? That's really all that we're talking about. And I will say, again, early in my career, I really, really resented the idea of networking and the idea that it shouldn't matter about relationships and things like that. And it's like, I remember I was very proud of this. When I was applying for colleges, I really wanted to go to Brown, like really wanted to go to Brown. I got waitlisted. And one of my father's friends, who my father had done a huge favor for his kid, was on the board of trustees at Brown. And my father said, you know what? He's known you for years. He'll write a letter to you, I think. And I was like, nope, I want to get in on my own. I don't want to get, well, guess where I didn't go to school? You know, but part of the thing is I can go, because what's the game? But the ultimate thing about it is this, is that people are good people generally. People want to help other people. People in this business, you don't get to have a career without people helping. And pretty much everybody, it's just part of the culture of the business, is that part of my job as someone who has a career is to help the people coming up behind. That's just, I mean, there's 15% or so of people that don't buy into that and are just like, no, I want to burn the place down after I leave. But the vast majority of people think that. And it's just a matter of people want to help, and they can only help if they know who you are. That's all networking is. It's just letting people know who you are so that people who want to be able to be helpful to you can be helpful to you. I mean, at least in terms of the career advancement part of networking. But one of the things that just is really important to realize is that your career will not be defined by the jobs you get. It will be defined by the relationships you build. That is it. Because you can get a job and you can do a really great job in a show. That is terrific, and that paid your bills and maybe got you some good reviews and some artistic satisfaction during those times. But once it closes, that show is over. Once you finish shooting someday and be out in the world, but that's over as part of your life. But your relationship with that director, your relationship with the other actors, your relationship with the stage manager, frankly, your relationship with the ticket taker at the front of the theater. Because you know who's ticket takers at the front of the theater generally? People who are interested in being involved in the theater. You know, get to know those people also. Also, don't be afraid to be those people. You know, but really, like when you think about your resume and you've got down on the right side, you've got your list of roles that you've played, and you've got down on the left side the list of directors of those roles and places you've done it. The right side, but that right side with the people, that's the really important. That's the really important one about how you're going to build a career. And every step in the collaborative process is an opportunity to build a relationship. That's what we're talking about here. And a lot of the way what we're going to talk about the rest of the day is going to be structured is around each stage of the process. What can you be doing to create and reinforce relationships with people? And again, maintaining relationships. I actually already mentioned this a little bit early on, but that's also just a really important part of it, because it doesn't matter if you meet an amazing person once and then don't find a way to continue that relationship. That's not going to be useful to you in any of the either artistic, emotional, or job-getting sorts of ways that relationships can be useful to you. But just to illustrate for you for a moment why this is probably the most important session we're going to have of this whole class period, I'm going to show you a few pages from my CV, from my resume. This is directing credits, film and television credits, some play production history, and university teaching work. Now I'm going to show you those pages again, and I have highlighted the jobs that I got through a relationship, either because they hired me again, or because I was referred to them by someone, or because someone was offered a job they couldn't take and recommended me to take that job instead. The point of it is, this isn't just something, this is everything. The ability to make relationships with people in this business is absolutely everything to actually building a long-term career. Whether it's going to be the most important thing to getting in one individual job, maybe, maybe not. But in terms of building a long-term career, it's absolutely key. Now, a couple of just sort of philosophical ways of thinking about it before we get into into kind of some of the nitty-gritty of best practices, which is one of this is something that comes from the world of not-for-profit development. And development, we talked about what not-for-profit companies were a while ago, but the development department, basically a lot of people think of it as the fundraising department. It's the place that raises money. You will get very familiar with the CMO development department in 8 months. You'll be getting plenty of letters from them asking for money. That's just your relationship with the school for the rest of your life. I've graduated from a couple of schools. That's my relationship with them. I went to this really great, because I ran a not-for-profit theater, and about 12 years ago, actually, after I've been running the company for about 10 years, I went to this really great seminar about not-for-profit development that totally changed the way that I think about it. Because what they talked about was that development isn't about developing money. It's about developing relationships. And what they talked about is there's this thing called the development continuum, that there are 6 conceivable relationships that any person can have with an organization. So it's ignorance, in the case of the Cry Havoc Company. I've never heard of the Cry Havoc Company. Awareness. Oh yeah, I've heard of the Cry Havoc Company. Interest. Oh yeah, I heard Cry Havoc does some interesting things. Involvement. Oh yeah, I went to see one of their shows. Commitment. I go to see at least one of their shows every season. Ownership. It's my favorite place to see a show. Like, those are the 6 categories of relationship that you can have. And just what this says is that your job, and this was actually something we did with every member of our community at the theater, is to go over this, is that your job as a person in a not-for-profit is always to be moving people to the right. You don't need to move people from here to here, but if you have an encounter with someone and they're here, you need to get them to here. If they're here, you need to get them to here. I've never heard of Cry Havoc. Oh, really? We're a New York-based company. This is what we do. Oh, I've heard of Cry Havoc. You know, let me tell you this fact about you that's going to make you intrigued. Oh, I've always meant to get involved. Really? Because we've got a reading next week you can come to. It's just about moving people one step to the left. And the mistake a lot of people made, and the mistake I made a lot, was, oh, I've never heard of Cry Havoc. Really? We're these people, and this is the reason you should love us, and this is the thing, and this is the thing, and oh, by the way, can I have some money? But the idea of this is if you can move people over here, by the time you start getting in this world, you don't even have to ask for the money because people are engaged with you and want to know how they can help. And so rather than trying to chase people down here to try to get money from them, find ways to welcome them in and then be looking for things that they can do. And I find just to be a really useful way to think about your relationship building. Because again, you can get in your head about the idea that I've met this casting director at this party, I need to get a lead in a film from tonight. You're not going to get a lead in a film from tonight. What you might do though is get in a place in their head that the next time you bump into them, they'll have a longer conversation with you because they remember the conversation. Or the next time you see that they're auditioning something, you're able to drop a line to them and not just be a random person, but say, hey, I really enjoyed that conversation we had at that event at the Public Theater last week. I was wondering if you could see me for this show. They're much more likely, if you can sort of take it stepwise, because the other thing is you're going to run into the same people over and over and over and over, especially if you're being smart about having a career mission, as we talked about the other week, and that you're looking to build relationships in the world that you're interested in working. And you're going to keep bumping into those people. And again, you don't have to get all the way here. You just have to work your way across. And then the other metaphor I just like to throw about this is about golf. Now, I don't play golf, but I understand conceptually how it works. And I know that when you're golfing, if it's like a 520-yard hole that you're here, a long way off, you're first going to come out with your driver. And you're going to hit the ball. You have no expectation of getting to the hole, but you're going to hit the ball as far as you can hit it in the direction of the hole. Then you're going to take out a finer tool. You're going to take out your iron, and you're going to try to get it on the green. Once you're on the green, you're going to take out your putter, and you're trying to get it in the hole. Now, how is this a metaphor for building relationships in a career? Your driver in this case, and look how far this gets you, because it's actually really, really important, and I think it's important we name it, is your courage. It takes a lot to go out and introduce yourself to someone. It takes a lot to send an unsolicited email to someone. It does. I don't think that I am like clinically anxious about meeting new people, but I get very anxious about meeting new people. I love spending time with people, but I get very anxious about meeting people. The other secret that I will let you in on is so do most people. And I think that there's a lot of ways in which we kind of get in our head like, oh, I'm so nervous and I'm so whatever, and that person's so wonderful. I will tell you, the person who I know who is absolutely the best at this and goes out in the world, and when he meets people at parties and they love him, and when he shows up, it's great. And frankly, a huge part of his career is built on just that everyone likes him so much. Frankly, there are other people who are as good at what he does, but nobody likes him as much. And he just thought, but I've talked to him and he's like, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I feel like I'm going to throw up every time that I go into a party. I hate it. Because he's a very quiet, private person, but he's like, but I know I've got to do it. So I do. And that's just the thing to realize. But also with that, just to realize in terms of like going up and meeting somebody at a party, when you're standing there at a place and you don't really know anybody or whatever, and someone walks up to you and it's like, hi, how you doing? I'm Alec. How amazing does that feel? To be that person for other people. That's going to really help you. And, probably these other people are as nervous as you are about meeting them. Or maybe you're just naturally gregarious and you're not nervous, and that's totally fine. Live it. It's a great gift. Enjoy it. But if you do get nervous, your courage is a big part of it. It's okay to name it. It's okay to name that it's scary, and it's okay. But the same thing is, there has not ever, 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 ever been a person who built a career by sitting in their apartment and not meeting. That has never happened. And you might feel like that, but that's what you're gonna do. And then your iron is your amiability. Like, do you seem like a cool person to know? Do you seem like somebody I would like to spend 5 weeks in a rehearsal process around? Are you somebody who seems like a decent person? Now, if you have the courage to meet people and they find you amiable, then and only then do they have any interest in whether you have talent. And just a lot of times what people end up doing is they sort of stroll out out in the world with their putter slung over their shoulder and the hole 100 and 520 feet away. And they're like, all right, here we go. I've got my talent. We're going to get this in the hole. Like you might have the best putting game in the world. That ball's not going in that hole from 520 yards away with a putter. It just isn't. And just to realize these are the things that you need to do to get to the place that it matters to other people, whether you're talented. And that includes, I mean, certainly you're talking meeting people outside, but even when and we're going to have a whole day on auditions and meetings next week, but even when you go into a meeting, if somebody's great, but you kind of get a weird vibe off them, that's going to have a real impact. You know, that you know, again, because we're casting someone not just to play the role, but also to be a colleague over the process of this thing. So this amiability really matters there. So does that make sense in terms of sort of broad picture about why this is important and where it fits in your life? Now, in terms of, we're going to start sort of stepping through kind of different opportunities you're going to have to encounter people and kind of some best practices. So like early correspondence and applications. We talked a little bit about this in the recorded part of the marketing thing. But this is very frequently going to be your first introduction, whether it's because you're sending a cover letter along with a headshot and resume, or because there's a theater you're interested in getting involved with and you want to send an email to their artistic director to say, I'd like to get involved with you. That's a really important thing to be able to do. And so, you know, as we talked about before, this is a sample letter that Jenny would have written. And again, that idea that you want to be sure always that the important information is at the top, or at least the information is going to want them to keep reading is at the top. And then that hopefully is going to pull them in. But one thing, before I talk about what's a really useful thing to put in this letter, one thing that I see in cover letters all the time that I will just tell you, don't put in cover letters. I'm so passionate about this because a thing that's really common is that people grow up in Missouri, pick up their life, move to Los Angeles, and compete in one of the most competitive businesses in the world because they're not very passionate about it. When we talk about things that are in your 99%, it is in no one's 99%, it is in no one's 10%. You can just assume, and I have a good friend who used to talk about, I don't trust people when they tell me that they're passionate about things because I take that for granted. And if you don't, that's a source of concern. So it's something I see all the time. And it's sort of a joke among people who get letters from people is that, so just save yourself that. But you do want people to see that you're passionate. You know, it's show, don't tell. What are the things that you're talking about? What excitement are we seeing in what you're writing to people that shows us that you're passionate rather than telling us? And something somebody said to me a while ago that I always really kind of gravitated towards is like a good inquiry letter or a good cover letter is basically a love letter. That basically what we're saying is, who are you? Why are you great? Who am I? Why am I great? Why should we want to be together? That's basically the formula of a good letter. Because frankly, they want to hear why you're interested in it. That's actually useful information. And frankly, sometimes useful information if the reason they're interested in you is not something that you actually do. But for the most part, it's useful because it's like, oh, they're excited, they are interested, they understand what we do. And that matches them up. Now they're telling me a bit about them, and now they're showing me what we have in common and why we want to be together. And you know, that basically can break down to 3 paragraphs. Dear Public Theater, I really love this thing that you did. I saw this show, and it really is the kind of work that I want to be doing. I've done this and this and this and this, and I think that I'm ready to do this. You know, I think that together, the kind of work that I bring would really benefit your upcoming production of Waka. Okay, awesome. You know, I mean, use actual words, but sort of that general structure is not a bad way to go. Another thing that's really useful, this is going to come up in a few places, but I've actually found this is so much of like a magic one. And actually, earlier this week, maybe I'll tell you next week because I can't tell you it now, but earlier this week, I ran into an I got something really pretty terrific that I'm very excited about because of this next thing, which is give other people an opportunity to see you in their world. But as somebody who's just like, the introduction I got to them was someone that like, that connected me to them in some way, and they gave me something I really wanted. I'll tell you about next week. But but that idea of people are really willing to be helpful to people generally, but especially to people who are in their universe and in their world. So again, I think I've used this that example before, but if you got an email randomly from someone saying, hi, I know you're a senior at SEMO, I'm thinking about going to SEMO next year, I'm gonna be in town, would you get coffee with me? Would you do that? Yeah, you probably would. If they said, hey, how are you doing? I'm thinking about going to SEMO next year. I went to your high school and would love, you'd probably be even more eager to, maybe not, be even more eager to connect up. Or my aunt works with your mother and she said that we should, that there's just, as soon as you find a way to connect yourself up to someone. So even saying, I saw this show at your theater, I saw this show, even that's a beginning of a connection. To be able to say though that I worked last year with so-and-so director and they told me about what a great experience they had working with you before. Oh, now I'm beginning to imagine this person is not a random letter writer out of nowhere, but an actual person that exists in my universe of people. So look for those sorts of things. You want to be able to tell people who are you and what kind of work do you want to do, or what kind of work are you interested in doing? And that I would really work on coming up with yourself for like a very brief but really great paragraph that sort of sums up like what are you about and what are you interested in doing that you can kind of drop in to letters that you send to people. And also be self-aware about what they're looking for and what you have to offer. Because I mean, I know, for example, I used to get hundreds of letters a year with applications for Cry Havoc's apprentice program. Frankly, a pretty great apprentice program. And it was very competitive. We got all sorts of people applying to be part of it. And there were people who was like, the people was like, hi, how you doing? I'm a friend of, I go to school with Susan Pasternak, who was an intern with you, an apprentice with you last year. She told me about what a great experience you had and thought that I would, I would be a good match for the program. Oh, that's really interesting. Or people is like, I really want to learn more about developing new plays, and I'm especially interested in learning these things. I think I can learn it from you. And it's like, hey, we do know how to teach someone how to do that. This is an apprentice program. We're looking for people who are looking to learn things. That's the kind of information we want about you. Also, definitely have gotten letters. They're like, hi, I've taken both Playwriting 1 and Playwriting 2, so I believe I would be able to play a leadership role in your development of new work activities. It's like, we're not looking for apprentices to play leadership roles in our thing. We're looking for people who are interested in being part of the process and learning about the process from people who not only have taken Playwriting 1 and Playwriting 2, but have been doing this for 20 years, And it's just sort of that idea of realize you don't have to bow and scrape to people because they're ahead of you in their career, but to acknowledge what is a reasonable thing they're interested in from me, what am I interested in from them. And also, frankly, there are people, and especially things if you're like trying to get involved in some sort of early career programming, they're actually really interested in how they can help you. Like that's why they have early career programs. And so to be able to kind of to talk in a thoughtful way about this is what I think I can learn from you, and whether it's program, but also a director that you admire. If there's a director you really admire, to write an email to that person and say, hey, I really enjoy your work and I'd love a chance to sit in on rehearsal one day and just watch how you work with actors. Like, you'd be surprised how often the answer is yes. Not every time, but like that kind of thing can happen. Target organizations and collaborators that share your sensibilities. Again, you don't want to be wasting your time trying to get involved in places that are not what you want to do. At the same time, just to be prepared, you're going to be offered opportunities to do things at things that are not what you want to do, and you just need to decide whether or not that's something that you want to do. Because even though it's not the perfect thing, yeah, it's a chance to get professional credit. It's a chance to work with an actor who I admire, even on kind of stuff that I don't like to do. It's a chance to get paid, frankly. A lot of times, you're getting paid to do that. But that's actually a little bit separate thing. I'm just going to throw it as, I will say, there's going to be times early in your career, this is not networking, but it kind of is, Times early in your career where you're going to have the opportunity to be, where you're going to have the opportunity to do non-paying work. And frankly, I mean, there are some people who are like, don't ever do non-paying work. You're a professional. And I mean, you can do that, but there's a lot of opportunities you can get from non-paying work. But my thing about that is, I think it is fine to work for no pay, but it's not okay to work for nothing. And sort of, you just need to figure out, like, what am I getting from this? Is it an opportunity to work with someone I admire? Awesome. Is it an opportunity to get a chance to start working at a theater that you really would like to be part of their broader community? Terrific. Is it something that's going to get you, think it's going to be a good thing to invite agents to come see you in? Terrific. Those are all reasons to do it. But if you're asked to do something for free, you always just want to check back and be like, all right, what is the benefit that would come to me from doing this? You know, and there's a lot of different reasons that it could be. Another thing, and again, this is going to come up several times, do your research. The more that you're able to talk in a letter to someone about something that makes it seem like you really know what you're talking about with them, the better. And this is going to be a recurring theme. And I know you're like, but yay, I'm out of school in a few months. I don't have to research anything anymore. No, you don't ever, and it's going to come in later, you don't ever want to walk into a room where you don't know what the play is. You don't ever want to walk in the room where you're sitting and somebody who you really would like to get to know is sitting in that room and you don't know enough to recognize what they look like. Like, you don't want to get yourself in those positions. You don't want to go in for a general meeting with someone and talk about the person they had a huge public fight with, but you didn't take the time to look them up to find out that they'd had some huge public fight, and maybe mentioning you worked with that person was not the thing that was going to get you what you wanted. So it just is one of those things that, you know, research is really important. And I will tell you, it's not the same, but like when I've gone in for like artistic director jobs and things like that, I like have a binder of research this thick, you know, and just like know things they would never expect you to know. But it's one of those weird things because, again, part of that is going to give you the opportunity to make you feel like you're part of their world. Because there is a little bit of something where it's like, if they kind of feel like, oh, you're already sort of part of what you're doing, it gets really easy to say, stick around rather than welcome in. And, you know, again, research is going to give you opportunities to find points of connection too. Now, other things that you might want to mention in a reach out and in a letter. And I can feel people, I always can when I talk about these things, being like, yeah, well, I'm not really going to write letters. Man, oh man, oh man, oh man. You would be amazed at how well it works. Like, you would be amazed. And the number of people I know who have significant careers who trace it back to that letter or that email that I wrote to somebody, and it started this relationship. It really is something you should be doing. But in terms of, if you are writing a letter to someone, referrals. Like, if you're trying to make a first introduction to someone and there's someone who you know in common with them, and you can get that person to write to them ahead of time and say, there's this terrific young actress, Jocelyn Shaw, she's going to be writing to you in the next few days. I've worked with her and think she's terrific. Boy, oh boy, is that going to put a different positive light in the way that they're looking at this email that you sent. You know, if you're able to get that, do that. Also realize referrals are things people are generally willing to give. It's totally good to ask people to do that because then people want to help. Also, you never know the nature of their relationship with that other person. And also, you don't ever want to put them in a position where they have to tell you, I don't feel comfortable recommending you for this. Like, that can be an uncomfortable thing. And also sometimes, like, I'd be totally fine recommending you for that, but not this. And so it's just a matter of absolutely ask, but it's always at the end, I totally understand if it's not possible. You know, I just wanted to check. You know, give them a very easy out where all they have to say is, I really don't have time, and then just move on. And for your own sake, assume it's something about their relationship with the other person and not their relationship with you. But, you know, it's a useful thing to do. If you don't get a direct referral, mentioning people that you know in common. You know, I was talking to my friend Gabriel Generally, and I did a show with you last season and said what a great experience it was. And he thought that that it would be the kind of place I'd fit in well, blah, 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 blah. Even if Gabriel's not writing ahead of time, that can be, again, a place where you're sort of popping into their head that somebody in common. Talking about their work, we're going to talk a little bit about this in meetings, when we talk about meetings next week, but like, think about how much it means to you if somebody says, I really enjoyed your performance in that play. Like, it means a lot to you. I'm going to let you know a secret. That never goes away. People do work because they want people to like it. And for someone to be able to say, hey, I really enjoyed this thing, and especially if there's something specific that they can say that they enjoyed about your work, that's, just going to open these people up to being, to welcoming you in. And also, again, it tells a bit about you, the things that you respond to. This play that you did, I really responded to because of X. Oh, that actually tells me a bit about what you're interested in as an artist. And really, really importantly, because this is the thing I think a lot of people miss, is give them a call to action. Because if it's just like, hi, Kat, how are you? I saw you in this play. I thought that you were terrific. And I think that we're the kind of people who would do good work together. Okay, what am I supposed to do about that? Get you at the end to say, is there a chance we could get together for a cup of coffee? I've got a reading of a show next week. I'd love it if you could come. Give them something to do about this letter other than be happy that this person likes my work. That said, you want to be considerate about what is the thing you're asking them to do. Because taking it, by extension, that person, we said, if somebody said, hi, I'm coming to SEMO and could you meet with me? Yeah, you probably would. If they said, hey, how you doing? I'm thinking about going to SEMO. I'd really like to get the feeling of what it's like to be a student. So could I stay with you for 2 weeks? And could you arrange it so I can come to all your classes? That would be awesome. Like, no, no, I'm not going to do that. So you want to be able to, at least on a first introduction, ask them to do something that's a fairly easy ask. I mean, an example that sometimes, again, the examples are away from acting is helpful. But like, if you're a playwright, to write to an artistic director and say, I'd love it if you could read my 5-act opus that's attached. No, but to say, I wrote this 5-act opus that I think you'd really enjoy. I've attached a 10-minute play. If you could take a look at that, I'd really love to be able to talk to you about what you think of my work. Yeah, all right, yeah, I can read a 10-minute play. That's the thing that I could do. And also something I find, it's something I didn't realize having lived in New York, basically since I was a teenager, but apparently my parents always laughed at the fact that whenever I was talking to them about what was going on, I was like, oh, I met this person for coffee, I met this person for coffee. It's like, that's what you do all the time in New York, is you meet people for coffee. So get a taste for coffee or something like that. I'm like, that's it, like, that's the sort of standard meeting people have, is they meet up over coffee. And again, sometimes the meeting is, hey, I want to meet with you because you might be able to get me work, or I'm interested in working with you. But sometimes it's just like, hey, I feel like we're similar types of people, we're interested in similar, we should get to know each other. Like, that's really useful networking to be doing too. But yeah, start the process, because it's the same, we're talking about moving people down the relationship continuum. It's sort of that idea about, it's not about, I'm going to send you this letter, I'm going to send you this email, and that's going to be the end of our relationship. This is how we're starting to roll the ball down the road. Make sure they know how to get you to the next step. And again, do these things. Because this is a story I think about all the time. There was one intern we used to have, Allie Keller, actually she was an intern before we called the company the Apprentice Company. And she was an intern at Cry Havoc. And while she was with us, she was between her junior and senior year of college, and she was prepping to direct How I Learned to Drive by Paula Vogel. Pulitzer Prize winning play. She was super excited about it, but she kept saying, there's a couple of questions I have about it. I just wish I could talk to Paula Vogel about it. I just wish she could answer my question. And I'm like, well, write to her. Like, and this is the magical secret of it, honestly. Like, what is the worst thing that can happen? The very worst thing that happens is she doesn't write back, which is also the very best thing that happens if you don't write to her. So you might as well write to her. And so she couldn't find her address, but knew she taught at Brown University in the graduate program. And so she wrote, a letter addressed to Dear Paula Vogel, Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. And a week later, her phone rang, and it was Paula Vogel on the phone. And they talked for an hour about the play, and she was just like, and part of it actually was that the place where she was doing the play was in the same, it was in a place near where Paula grew up. And so that sparked her interest. They talked for an hour, and they ended up scheduling every 2 weeks. They had a half-hour phone call up until the time that she opened the show. And it's just like, yeah, you know, you never know, man. Like, you know, people are decent. People are decent. And if you give them a chance to be decent to you, they might just be. They might just be. But if you don't give them the chance to be decent to you, then they're not. Again, that's all networking is. Giving people a chance to be decent to you because they want it. They want it. And the one thing that I just hope is the most important takeaway you take away from this session is this very, very simple thing, but that is so easy to forget, that the people that you want to meet are people. They are people. They are people just like other people are. They are people who once sat in rooms like this trying to figure out how they were going to have a career in this business. They are people. And so it's just very simple, because I talk to people, it's like, well, why don't you introduce yourself? Why don't you write a letter to them? And it's like, oh, I don't want to, There's a very simple litmus test to this. As a human person, if it were me, would I be fine getting this email, letter, tweet, phone call, and counting? That's all. That's all. Just check. If somebody wrote to you and are like, hey, I saw you in this play. I thought you were terrific. I'd love to talk to you about it. Would that hurt your feelings? Probably not. No, I'm sure it wouldn't hurt your feelings. And you know what? You probably would at least consider getting together with them to talk about it. At the very least, you're feeling, you know, they haven't done anything bad. You know, that said, you write a letter to someone, you don't hear back, and you write another letter that says, Dear Paula Vogel, fuck you. Fuck you for not writing back to me. I'll give you one more chance. You know what? I wouldn't like to get that email. I'm not sending that email because I wouldn't like to get that email. But really, that's all it is. Even if you're at a show and you see a director, the director of the show is there, and you see that they're standing in the back of the theater and watching, and you're like, oh, I really love this person's work. I recognize them because I've done my research about my business or know who's out there, things like that. Would I, if I was that person, like it if someone came up and said, hi, I just, you know, saw you here. I just want to let you know how much I enjoyed Act One, and I really loved this show that you did last year. If that were you, would you be okay with that? Yeah, especially if that person presented it in such a way that left it open for you to continue the conversation, or if you said, oh, thank you very much, I'm glad you do, and turn away, that they say thank you and walk away. You know, that said, you're at a preview for a show and you see an intermission, the director huddled up with their two assistants and going over their notes and writing things up. If that were you, would you want someone coming up and telling you how much you enjoyed Act One? No, you probably wouldn't. So you don't. Literally, that's all. That's all. If you're ever wondering, is this a cool thing to send? Just imagine, if I got this, would I be okay getting it? If someone walked up and said this to me, would I be okay with that? If the answer is yes, then do it. And if they turn out to be an asshole, that's on them. You know, if you keep finding everyone's an asshole, you might want to look into see if it's on you. Because maybe your measurement of what is appropriate is off. But that's all. They're people. And again, I've talked to people who are kind of like well-known fancy people. Like, it's so weird to go to parties because no one will come up and talk to me because they think it's weird to talk to me, and I just stand there and don't talk to people. You know, it's kind of amazing how that can happen. Social media can be a useful way to get into people's worlds. To some degree, but it's one of those things that, like, if you're following someone on Twitter, someone on Instagram, who you know, well, one of the things that that's doing is research. Because if you happen to bump into this person, which again happens when you're in New York, you're gonna bump into, Stephanie J. Block someplace. Like, that shit happens. Like, that's gonna happen. And if you know what's going, maybe you'll have something to talk to that person about, which is helpful. But also, a lot of people, there's a lot of like scuttlebutt that happens. If you find the right people to follow, you can find out a lot about what's happening in the business because they post about it, so you sort of have a indirect network with that person. But also, it can be a really useful thing. I will talk about this a little bit later, but there are some people who will just like accept friend requests from people. And then you've got a little bit of an in. And I will tell you, I had a thing earlier this year when we went on to, when we all went to remote teaching. And I kind of had this idea about, you know what we should do is put together a collection of like short plays that are designed to be done on Zoom that people can use in theater classrooms. So that would be a great resource. That would just be a nice thing to do. So I started reaching out to some playwrights, those like, could you in like the next 5 days write a 10-minute play that takes place over Zoom? But also, John Patrick Shanley, I had some early in my career, a couple of conversations with about some things, because I directed one of his shows that he liked, and we were sort of talking about moving it, and it didn't end up happening for reasons that are a whole other thing. But that was like even before Facebook started. But then once he started on Facebook, once I saw him on Facebook because we had mutual friends, and so I gave him a friend request. He accepted it. That was nice. Now that's someone who is literally in my social networking. This is awful. Who wrote Jesus Hopped the A Train? And Stephen Adly Guirgis. Yes, that's embarrassing, especially given where this story is ending up. But Stephen Adly Guirgis is someone who I've never met, certainly admire his work. But we have mutual friends on Facebook, and about 5 years ago, I was commenting on something that this mutual friend had posted, and then Stephen replied to that, and then and we sort of had this little back and forth, so my friend requested it. And he said, okay, and accept my friend request. Now, when I had this idea about wouldn't it be cool to have these Zoom plays that we did, I was friends with these people on social media, on Facebook, so I sent them a Facebook message and said, hey, this is a thing I think would be cool to do for people in the face of this crisis. Obviously, you're someone theater students admire a great deal. Would you like to be part of it? And both of them wrote back within a half hour, like, yeah, I'm in. Like, okay. And then all of a sudden, when you're trying to get other people to get on board, you're like, oh, by the way, Pulitzer Prize winners Stephen Adly Guirgis and John Patrick Shanley, are in on this project. And it's just like, okay. But then it was like, that literally, I think that's sort of a great thing about it's the social network, but that's how networks work. They knew I was friends with them. They're like, oh, okay, you're in my universe. This seems like an interesting thing. Again, people will say yes to weird things. And especially if they feel like you're someone who is somehow in their orbit. So that's a lot of ways in which social media can be useful, is just to basically plant a flag in this person's orbit. As someone who's in their world. Because frankly, I'm not sure that an unsolicited email to Stephen Adly Guirgis would have gotten the job. Frankly, I don't think he remembers this back and forth that we had 5 years ago on Facebook. But getting it from someone that at some point I was interested enough to accept their friendship, that becomes a little bit different. And that's something you can do. With auditions and interviews, I'm going to do a little bit about auditions and interviews right now, but we have a whole class next semester about kind of really best practices for auditions and interviews. But one of the things, that happens, like if you go out for 40 auditions and you go for those 40 auditions, you get 7 callbacks and you book 2 jobs. A, this person's doing very well. Just be prepared. This person is doing very well if they went out on 40 callbacks. We don't have screen room enough to put all the auditions they'd have to go to. But a lot of people who don't think in a very productive way about their career and frequently don't end up staying in their career, really look at this. Like, this was successful. These things were all unsuccessful. I might as well not have gone to these things. But just looking at this, you're going to spend most of your auditioning life in these meetings than you are in these meetings. And so a lot of times in terms of relationship continuum, people end up thinking, okay, well, basically there were, 38 people who just fucking hated me, and then 2 people who think I'm amazing. I was like, no, that isn't actually what happened at all. Every single one of those people are at least aware of you. It was successful that way. Every audition you go out to for a new person is a step forward in your career. There's a new person who is aware that you are out there. That counts. That counts for something real. Now, there are other people who are going to be interested in you. Certainly the people who called you back were interested in you. But also there are other people like, oh, they're really not right for this part, but they're really interested. I'm going to hold on to their headshot. That happens all the time. Every single audition I've ever been to, at the end of the day, people take the headshots they want to take at the end of the day of the people that they want to. So there's that thing. Also, maybe there's involvement. Certainly, these people who cast you are now involved with you, for sure. But also, there might be a couple of people like this wasn't right for them, but I know a show I'm doing later in the season, and I'm just going to call them and ask them to come to callbacks for that when the time comes. Like that kind of thing can happen. There is also the incredibly rare situation where someone will feel committed to you in a way that was, and they didn't even call you back. And there's one example I think about a lot with this in my life is, do you guys know Emily Kinney? You watch Walking Dead. She played Beth on Walking Dead. But her very first audition out of NYU was for a show that I was directing. And she was not right for it. But I had been writing a show that I was very excited about, but I was like, I have no idea where I'm going to find someone who can play the lead in the show. And she walked in, and she was exactly what I had in mind for this, and was a wonderful actress. And so in my head, I was like, okay, she's not right for this thing I'm casting, but I need to get in touch with her because I'm going to need her on this play. And so sure enough, after she, we were finished with the audition, I wrote to her and I told her, we weren't right for this, but I think you're wonderful. I have this thing I'm working on. We ended up talking, and she ended up doing 2 readings and a workshop of that show before she ended up moving out to LA. But like, I didn't call her back for that show. But she was the person I was most excited about all the people who came into the thing. And part of the trick of it is that if you're just in a binary thing about the 2 things that can happen in an audition is I can either book the job or I cannot book the job, this person looks just like that person. But the fact of the matter is, you ended up from those 40 auditions with actually a pretty wide array of places that people have ended up going. And so what I'm going to say, and this might sound a little bit controversial, but I really believe in this, that you want to view your audition or meeting primarily as a place to start a relationship. And then be pleasantly surprised if a job comes out of this meeting. Go in there, and part of it is go in there, show them what you do best. Always go in showing them what you do best and be decent and pleasant and nice to them. And maybe you'll get this job, maybe you won't. There's a lot of things you have absolutely no control over. That's going to determine whether you get the job. But whether you do good work that shows off what you do best and seem like a decent person, those are things you can control. But what I have also found is people who have really embraced this approach have ended up getting the jobs much more often. Because again, they're not coming in, they're trying to be what people think they're looking for, but they're coming in like, hi, how you doing? You are a person who casts things. In fact, you're casting this thing. Let me show you what I got. Thanks so much. Let me know if you need it for this. If not, let me know when you need it. That's the thing. And also, again, do your research. This is a thing that I'm sure you've heard this advice, but like keep a journal, keep a log of who you have met, what auditions you've gone to, who these people are. Because what you don't want to do is have that time when you come in and say, oh, it's really nice to meet you. And they're like, yeah, I called you back 3 months ago for this other show. That's not awesome. Much more awesome is, hey, how you doing? It's great to see you. I so enjoyed my callback for this thing the other day. I heard great reviews of that show. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Anyway, you do that because you've done your research and you've kept track of things. Can you just imagine putting yourself in that person's shoes, how much more ready you are for this person's audition than just somebody who walks in and does their audition? Which again, that's also fine too, but it is. Because again, the people behind the table are people. People like people who like their work. People like people who remember them. People like people who are pleasant. People like people who don't have a grudge because you didn't cast them in that thing. Those are all things that are positive things that you can say. So again, do your research so that when you walk in that room, you know what it is that you have in common with these people so you can have something to talk about. And again, it's totally a thing that you can do. It's like, okay, great, do your monologue. It's like, oh, by the way, my old roommate actually is your cousin. Like, isn't that crazy? But I'm gonna tell him that we met to. Like, if you can find a connection like that, it's people are gonna remember. Hey, I studied with Gene Lasco. He always talked about what a great student you are when I met him in class. Like, again, who doesn't want to hear that kind of thing about them? And again, it puts you in their mind as a specific person in the world rather than rando audition. So let's talk about being in rehearsal and on set and what you can do for networking in there. And this is going to be a relatively short section for this reason. This is where the work happens, and it is not a time for networking. That is one of the things that I will tell you is the most, people just never get invited back. When you're doing a show, there's a team like a production assistants and, with fancy people, and there's the production assistants who every break are going over to talk to the fancy people to see if they can schmooze them up. You know who doesn't get invited back the next time? You know who doesn't get to be an assistant on the next show? Those people. You know who does? The people that when Hugh Jackman is over in this corner of the room, when break is called, they come over to the director to see what they can do to help. Those are the people who get invited back the next time. Those are the people that when the director's sitting down having lunch with you, they say to this really helpful production assistant, why don't you pull up a chair and sit down with us? Like that, do your job in those rooms, be really good to work with, because that's the thing that basically all of your other marketing materials, all of your other networking activities is about convincing people without actually seeing, I am talented and good to work with. Well, show up. This is your chance. Do it. Do the work. And again, be the kind of person that others will want to work with and will want to work with again. Really do your part to accomplish the task at hand. What can you do to extra pitch in? Solve problems. Man, oh man, the directors love actors who, when you get to something and they're like, oh, by the way, I was thinking if I did this, would it help? People who can solve problems, or even, they never even say, they just fix it. Oh, I see what's going on. I'm going to take half a step left and that's going to fix everything. Be aware of those things. And those are people who are really welcome in the rehearsal room. Remember names. That's really important. And I will be honest with you, that is something I struggle with. I do. I have, I think, a little bit of actual face blindness, and I actually have trouble recognizing people out of context, which is a real problem in this business. I mean, it really is. You know what, though? I've actually found myself able to recognize people even better without, which makes me think maybe I need to be looking at people's hair or something. Like, honestly, I'll be straight with you. I was a little bit, not freaking out, but I was really anxious about whether I was going to be able to recognize anyone when we came back with the so. And I've actually been like, oh no, I could totally recognize everyone, which is sort of weird, and I want to look into it, why that is. But also, I get nervous about saying people's names. But it is a thing that if you're great at remembering people's names, that's awesome. I think that I tell you about, because Jenny Curlin, who again has come up in the past, but she is amazing at recognizing people. And it's just like we would go to events together, and I'd be like, who do we know? And she'd just like around the room, this person and that person, this person auditioned for us 3 years ago. And it's just like, okay, I didn't think I knew anyone. Turns out I know 15 people in this room. But if you are someone who has trouble remembering names, like work on that and work on not just like get better at remembering names, but what are strategies? I will tell you before every class that I have, not every class session, but like at the beginning of the semester, I sit down with the photos of all the students in the class so I can begin to recognize people, because I know it's hard for me to do. When I'm going to a meeting with a group of people, I like to try to find out ahead of time who's going to be there and find pictures of them so that I can remember. And also even that idea of, I know these 5 people are going to be at the meeting, so I know I need to remember a Roberta, a Jonas, or whatever, and I come in at least knowing the names. But like, you need to figure out if you're someone who has trouble remembering names, and it might be spending too much time on this because it's something that I struggle with. But those are, come up, be working on strategies for those things because it's important. The other big thing I've discovered about remembering names, because this is the thing, I actually don't think I really have as much trouble as I think I do. I have had a couple of kind of traumatic experiences of calling someone the wrong name when I really should have known better. And I think it makes me a little bit gun shy. But what I found is call people by their name early. Because if I, if I say, hey, Jocelyn, to you on the second day of rehearsal, you're going to go like, I'm Kat, that's Jocelyn. If I do it on the 15th day of rehearsal, that's a whole other category of problem. And also something I find is once you've said their name out loud to them, you remember. It's like, okay, I was right about that. I was right about that. I've said it. So anyway, take your shot early, because if it's wrong, it's not a big deal. And if it's right, you tend to remember. Sorry, were you raising your hand or was someone else raising?
I was.
Yeah.
Then I put it down.
Okay. Fair enough. Great. And again, do your job and respect the job of your collaborators. That's a really important thing about being in that room. That, you might have a really great idea, but if you're the actor who's the other actor in the scene, it's like, oh, Director Alec, what would be great is if she crossed down this way. Like, that's just not your job, man. Just like, don't. The costume designer comes in with 2 different sweaters for one of the characters. No, it might be the costume designer and director might come and say, what do you guys think, works best for this? But if they don't volunteer your opinion on what the costume should be. If it's your costume, then that's something that yeah, all right, you can have an opinion about that. But frankly, you get an opinion about that. You don't get to say it. Which is an important thing to say, is like, I like this sweater better, but the costume designer says, actually, I think the story's better told with you in the other sweater. Okay, that's your job. Gotta respect your job. Because that, for real, other than being like a crazy sociopath, which happens rarely, but is having the thing that makes people most unwelcome in the room is when they're trying to do other things. So just know where those lines are. And actually, we're going to do a thing a little later in the semester about kind of really delineating those lines a little bit better. But and most importantly, be indispensable. If you can be the person in whatever room you're in, whether it's because you're the lead actor in the play or a supporting actor in the play or a production assistant on the play, but if you're someone that at the end of the process, they can look and say, we could not have gotten this show done as well as we did if Trey hadn't been. That's what you want. That's what you want. And so, try to do that. After a collaboration is also, an opportunity where you kind of have to decide, okay, we've worked together for 4 weeks rehearsing shooting this film. We've worked together for 6 months running this play, or 2 weeks running this play. That basically all of those people that you were in this thing with are now involved with you. Like, all right, awesome. So I've moved these people down into this, at least this part. Maybe other people will feel more strongly about it, but at least they're involved with you. But it's a question you need to ask about, who do you want this person I was just doing something with to be in your life? Are they someone, I want to be a friend? Like, that's a real thing. I'll tell you, like 100% of my friends in New York are either people that I work with or significant others of people I work with. Like, almost literally every person, except maybe some people that were left over from college who ended up going and doing something else. But yeah, you're going to meet people that you're just like, hey, this is a cool person. I want to be friends with them. That's awesome. Or do I want them to be someone I work with? They're not necessarily someone I want to hang out all the time, but I really like being in a scene with them, and I want to find other opportunities to do that. I really like this director. I want to work with this person again. Or do I just want this person kind of in the broader network of people that I can reach out to if I need to, but I'm not especially eager to work with them again or whatever. There's also possibly like, I want them as far away from me as I can get. Frankly, that rarely happens, but usually that's mutual and it solves itself. But one of the things is, one, just to be aware of what this is, but then also to find a way to make them aware of what it is. And I don't know why, but I find a lot of people get kind of weird about saying, hey, I really enjoyed working with you and would love to work with you again. I don't know why, but there are a lot of people who get kind of weirded out by saying that. But again, litmus test, wouldn't you like someone to tell you that they like working with you? Or to say, hey, this was awesome. I'd love just to hang out sometime. Let's, can we make a plan to do that? To actually let them know what you want. But let them know, again, if it's true, that you enjoyed working with them. Now, of course, if there's someone you didn't like working with, you don't have to burn that bridge down standing there and kick them on your way out the door. But you also are under no obligation to say, I loved working with you and let's find an opportunity to do it again. In part because you want the people who you do say that to realize they didn't say that to everyone. They actually mean it. They said that to me because they meant it. So let them know that they enjoyed working with them. Let them know you'd like to work with them again. If they hired you, thank them. Frankly, those people probably have other jobs they can hire you for. So being gracious in that way and saying, thank you, I really enjoyed this process. Thanks for casting me in this. I really enjoyed this process. I know as the producer, you just made all of this happen. I really appreciate it. Now, if you're doing something, if you hired them, if you're producing, thank the people who made your work possible, especially if you're producing it and it's like a showcase thing and you're not paying people. Like they basically donated to your show. Thank them like they're donors to your show. Now, one thing that people do at the end of, some people do at the end of shows is give cards to people. Like that can actually be a nice thing to do and then give them a memento. It's totally fine not to. The one thing that you do want to do is, there actually is a thing that a friend of mine had a kid who was in school and they had a rule that if you were having a birthday party, you could invite up to 5 kids or all of the kids. And it's sort of a little bit of the same thing. Like people get, you know, I was in, Barry was my primary scene partner and I got her a card, wrote her a note, I wrote them a note at the end of this. And, you know, to talk about how much I enjoyed working together. People will get that. But what isn't awesome is I gave a card to everybody but Adam. You know, don't be that. You know, if you've got 1 or 2 people. Yeah.
So you're not talking like a business card.
Oh, no. I'm talking like and it can be a note, you know, just a note. But yeah, just like, you know, closing night cards, you know, your things. People do that. People do that in the professional world too. But also many people don't. But that is a thing that you can do if it's something that you like doing. Giving gifts. That's also something, again, probably not to everybody, maybe. But that's a thing that sometimes people do, especially to a specific person who they had a relationship with. And again, it can be a nice way to signal that we want things to go forward. Now, we're not talking about I'm giving you an Amazon gift card. Like, that's not the point. You want it to be personal. You want it to be specific to the project. And you want something that will remind them of you and the good parts of your process. It doesn't need to be expensive. And artifacts, I've actually found, are really great. Because one thing that I did, I made a documentary a few years ago. And one of the things that we did was we had our big storyboard, you know, with all the cards up on it. And just on opening night, I had taken one of the cards and gotten it framed and gave it to the director. It's just like, it didn't really cost me $10 for a frame. But for those of you who've seen it, it said Lonnie Cries. But it was something that he sits right in the middle of his desk now. It's, you know, you can do that sort of thing. I directed an actor in a show a few years ago, and he was really great in it, but there was one monologue that he really struggled with. And we really wrestled it to ground, And just opening night of the show, he just handed me an envelope, and I opened it up, and it was that page from his script with a note that said, "Thanks for everything." Which is like, that's awesome. Like, I think about it now, almost 10 years later, and it's like, what a nice thing to do. And so it's just like, that can be a nice thing to do for people if you're thoughtful about it. And again, that person I have very, very warm feelings about. I would have had warm feelings about them anyway, but what a thoughtful thing I still think of from time to time. And I still have it. It sits inside my desk, but I stumble upon it from time to time and think of it. You can send follow-up thank you notes. Again, emails are fine. You know, also you can mail someone something. Can be handwritten or emails. Again, you want to be specific if you're thanking them for the experience of working together. You don't want to send someone an email that they think you probably sent to the rest of the cast. You know, you want something that's like, hey, I really enjoyed our scene working with this together, and I'll never forget the first time you threw that pie in my face, or whatever, whatever the thing is that's specific. Again, remind them of good parts of the process. Again, something else we'll talk about later this semester, but like, not awesome is, oh yeah, this is fine. And wasn't Kat a pain in the ass to work with? Like, that's not what you need to put in your letter to this person. And again, thank them for the process rather than the product. Everyone's going to have in their lives 1 or 2 or 3 projects, and frankly, you might have more of them early in your career where you're like, this is the best thing I've ever worked on. Like, I feel like I've done my best work on this. Is the best thing I've ever worked on. But you don't need to tell someone this was the best show I've ever been a part of to write them a really thoughtful letter. And you know, to be able to say that I really enjoyed this process with you, that to talk about that rather than the product. And again, instead, if in fact this thing you worked on is the thing you are most proud of you've ever worked on, yes, absolutely say that. But certainly once you've been in the business 5, 10, 15 years, it's going to become a higher and higher bar for that thing. Also, friend them on Facebook and social media. Like, that could be really useful. If you have not already done it by the time the show closes or by the time the shoot ends, I recommend waiting a few days or a week until you do it, before you do it, just for that very simple matter of you're now planting a flag in their life outside of the show. That it's not we're friends because we're in rehearsal together today, but we're friends because we did that thing together before and now we are still part of each other. You know, that said, if people are friending each other during the night, don't save it for that. But I also, you know, rather than sending it the same night as you close, wait a few days. And then follow up after about a month or 2. Especially if there's somebody, I mean, frankly, if there's somebody you want to be friends with, you know, then be friends with them. Hopefully you've gone out to a movie and you've had them over to your apartment by 2 months from now or a month from now. But it just can begin that cycle where it's like, hey, you know, I was just started a new rehearsal, just started rehearsal for my next project. And I was thinking about what a great time we had in the last one. Just thinking about you and hoping you're well. Great, great. Again, now you just keep yourself in their world. And there are people that I know, it's not something I have ever done, but there are people that I know that really do keep basically a spreadsheet of people they want to keep in touch with. And it's like 50 people long, and either they just block off a Saturday and just every 3 months write emails to everyone on that list, or they block out an hour each week and try to bang out, you know, 5 emails a week to those people. But like, that's not a terrible idea. You know, just in terms of just to keep in contact with people that you want to keep in contact with. Again, it doesn't need to be every single person you've ever met. Who are the people that you want to be further to the right on your continuum? Those people, it's worth making the effort to keep in touch with them. And you might need to keep track of it. Like, it might need an organizing way to do that. Also, sometimes before a project can be a useful time to have some sort of networking connection. When you're involved in it, certainly if you see, hey, I'm in this show with Trey, who I was in a show with last year. Maybe shooting him an email ahead of time saying, hey, I'm looking super forward to working with you again. Like, that might be a nice way to make this an entrance into what's going on. If you've never met a person before, but you know you're casting something with them, shoot them an email, maybe friend them on Facebook, then maybe, you know, but there are things that you can do to sort of start the idea that we're not just going to be part of each other's lives in this room, but we're going to be part of each other's lives outside of this room also. Also really useful is when you're not involved. If 2 friends of yours get cast in the same thing, what a great opportunity to shoot them both an email, or put the both of them on an email and say, you know, hey, Jocelyn and Kat, I see you guys were casting this thing together. I've had such a blast working with the both of you. I think you're going to enjoy working with each other. Like, yeah, that's a nice thing to do, a nice thing to get. Again, using your litmus test, if you were casting a show, would you like to hear that from someone? And would you like that sort of pre-introduction to another person you're going to be working with? Yeah. Also, sometimes what people do is, especially if it's like something is an article in Playbill about the casting of this show, you know, they sometimes will post a thing on Playbill where it's, I mean, we'll post a thing on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, where it's like, hey, congratulations to this person and this person for being cast in this thing, great people working together. Like, that's very cool. And it also promotes that thing that they're doing. That's also just a little bit of a side thing, is helping other people to promote their work is really appreciated. Like, you can't do that for every single thing, or maybe you can. But like, I know, it's actually came up today that there's a, that the documentary that I mentioned, I usually post stuff about it on, like when it's in the media, I post it on Facebook. And actually it's interesting because it's changed. In the 8 months or so after it opened, it was like marketing. It was like, look at this thing, look at the list it was on, look at the thing. But now it's actually more a networking thing where it's just like, oh, I want the people who worked on the film to see that it was mentioned, in Newsweek. Like that's like, it's more, that is the reason I put up. But like today actually was mentioned, there was an article in the Times about the best documentaries to watch on Netflix, and it was on. I was like, well, that's amazing. So I posted it on Facebook. But then there's this woman who was about 5 years behind me in grad school. I met at 2 alumni events, but every time I post about the film, like she wrote me this really nice thing after she saw it, but she always like shares it and she shared it. And I'll tell you what, she was a very nice person. I have much warmer feelings towards her than I do other people who graduated 5 years. Not that I'm against those other people, but it's like, what a nice thing to do. And it's a little power you have to share good news about other people. People appreciate when you do that. Other times that you can meet people is at a performance. And one, it can be if you see someone in a show and you want to meet them. I have met terrific people, either because I've waited after the show and been like, I really love your work and want to talk, because they've waited after the show and they wanted to talk to me. That's definitely a thing that's done. Now, again, the likelihood of having a meaningful meeting conversation with somebody when you wait outside the off-Broadway show or off-Broadway show that they did versus I'd really like, I get to talk to Idina Menzel, and so I'm going to wait in the, in the line outside the dress at stage door. Like, you're probably not going to have a really meaningful conversation with Idina Menzel at stage door. But that definitely is the thing that can happen. So one, you want to be aware of their potential time limitations. There have definitely been times, are going to be times where you, and I have had them, where you stop and you just have a whole conversation with someone. You don't have any place to go, you end up talking on the sidewalk for an hour. Like, that can happen. That said, also, you might meet someone after the show and they have their family who's at the show and they're trying to go to meet them out for dinner. And so you just need to be prepared that they might have some place to be. So approach it with that in mind. Part of that is have your elevator pitch ready. Like, what do you want to say to them? Like, what do you want to tell them? Why are you waiting around? Like, what is the thing that you want from them? And to give them an opportunity, be ready to give them an opportunity to talk later. That it's like, hey, I really enjoyed your work. It was really terrific. Like, oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm actually running someplace. And to be able to be like, hey, awesome. I actually would love to talk to you about this thing. Can we get a cup of coffee if I shoot you an email? To give them to have a plan for how you're going to continue the conversation if they do have to go. Also, really importantly, be careful whether you're to be clear with them about whether you're a potential colleague or a fan. Because there is a different thing between coming, hey, I love you in the show, you're super great, versus, hey, how are you doing? I'm an actor and I really loved your performance in this, and I just love working with people who work like you work. Okay, that's going to put up different antenna for this person than I thought you were great in the show. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the show. You're the kind of person I love working with. Really, what kind of work do you do? Because also that person is probably interested in you. Have a business card. Talked about it last week, but that's the great example of, I'm sorry, I've got to go. Oh, awesome. Here's my card. Is it cool if I reach out to you and whatever? Like, it just really, again, they're going to stick that card in your pocket. They're going to be pulling the stuff out of their pocket that night, and they're going to come across you again, which is helpful. Then you can also follow up and write. If you met them and you want to follow up and write to them, or frankly, if you're not able to meet them, you can write after the show to somebody and say you like them. Frankly, if it's at a theater, certainly, most people, frankly, you can track down their email address. I mean, most people you can. But definitely, if you've seen their show at a theater, you can drop off a note to them at the theater, and they'll give it to you. So you can always get to someone. Do it by letter if possible. I mean, email addresses are fine, but nobody gets letters anymore. It's kind of magical when you actually get a hard copy letter. So, that can be a useful thing to think about. Keep it reasonably brief. You don't want to open up a 5-page letter from someone you don't know. I mean, that gets kind of weird, but 2/3 of a page, yeah, something like that feels about the right for someone you don't know very well. And again, give them a call to action. What do you want to do with them about it? Hey, how are you doing? I saw this play you wrote. I'm an actor who, I really, I've done this playwright's work and your work reminds me so much of them. I'd really love to keep track of your work. Do you have any plays that you could send me of yours to read? I'd love to read other of your work. Stuff like that. It's like, okay, so it's not just, oh, nice, this person liked me, but they're engaging. There's something that we're going to have an interchange about. But the other magical thing that gives you the opportunity to do is they say absolutely. They send you the play. A week later, you get to write to them and say, hey, I just finished this play. I really loved it. Is there any chance you want to get together for a cup of coffee? I'd really love to know more about your work. And but that, again, you don't need to hit the ball out of the park on your first time at bat. No, this is not going to, you know what I'm saying. I don't think that metaphor is going to fully track. But, but there is this idea about to be sure, though, that what you are doing is at least you're bunting. So that I'm getting on base here, basically. It's like, okay, it's not just I'm going to throw this out into the world and never hear back. But here's a thing that's going to cause you to do a thing, that's going to give me an opportunity to do a thing, that's going to give you an opportunity to do a thing, and so on and so on and so forth. That's why the call to action is really important. And again, being like, because for a playwright, could you send me one of your other plays? I'd love to read it. Sure, that will take me 30 seconds to find it and attach it and send it to you. And isn't that nice? Someone wants to read my work. Could you please write a play for me? No. But you know what? After you've gotten to know that person for a year or so to say, and done two of their shows, you know what? To say, I really love your writing, and do you think you could write something with a role in it for me? You know what? Yeah, they might. Yeah, they might. The other thing that I will say is there are a number of relationships that I can think of in my life that are really important, creative, and ongoing relationships that were people I met after a show. Again, going both directions. Like, that's a very real thing. Anyway, when you're contacting someone, I was setting myself up for a slide that wasn't next. However, whether you write to them by email or by hard mail, be specific. Let them know what about them and what about you makes you think that you should get to know each other better. Again, it's a similar thing to what you said earlier. But also be aware of getting in their heads, because this can be a thing that can mess people up, which is, you want to be able to say, hey, I loved your performance in this show. Again, people you want to get to know are not just people who can cast you. Other actors who are involved in the kind of work you want to be involved in, that can be a great way to end up involved in work that you want to be involved in. But you don't want to say, oh, I loved your performance. In that one moment where there was the single tear that dropped, again, use your litmus test. Would you like somebody calling out specific moments and things like that in a show you're still working on? You might not realize that tear comes down your eye, someone names it, and it's never coming back. So just be decent about that. Again, whether it's because you're talking to them in person or because you wrote them a letter, just be aware of that little pitfall. But also, performances are great opportunities to meet other audience members. Probably if you're at a Broadway show or if you're at an off-Broadway show. Again, all of these, there's the Chicago on-loop, off-loop. There's the comparisons. At an off-Broadway show, the chances of someone sitting next to you being part of the business is reasonably good. At an off-Broadway equity showcase, it's really good that one of the people sitting next to you is a friend of one of the actors who are in the show who is also an actor. But they can be really, really great places to meet people in the audience. So don't be afraid if you're sitting next to someone to talk to them. And like, I know Jerzy Gwiazdowski, who became one of my most important collaborators. He actually Zoomed in because he wrote one of the plays we're doing for the New Normal. He Zoomed in the other day. But he was my managing director of the company that I was artistic director of. He was for 10 years. I met him when we sat next to each other at the opening night of a show that both of us knew people. Like, that's how we met. So, it's crazy how people. Also, as an aside, because I didn't mention earlier, I can't tell you the number of people who were incredibly important collaborators and long-term colleagues of mine who I met either at a meeting where they didn't hire me or where I didn't hire them. And actually, Jen Kerfman, who again is someone else who we're doing one of their plays for the new normal plays and zoomed in the other day. But she actually was somebody who she interviewed me for a directing job that for a thing she was producing and didn't hire me. But do you know what I didn't do? Was say, well, screw her, I'm getting out of here. I wrote her an email and I thanked her for meeting her and saying how much I thought what they were talking about doing with the show was exciting. I went to see the show. I wrote her an email afterwards saying how much I enjoyed the show. And I thought that their director they went with was a really good choice and made a lot of strong choices. And then you know what she wrote back? Thanks so much. You want to get a cup of coffee? And that's how it became a really long-term relationship started. So again, it's not always about getting the job. It's about getting the relationship. Also, good time to reach out to people is when they get good news. You know, somebody gets a big job, somebody has a baby, you know, any number of different things. People like when people celebrate along with them. Also realize in that case, this person booked a big role in a TV show. Probably everyone they know is writing to them, but you should be one of them. You should be one of them. You know, and also it can be, you can also maybe find time for this show. It's great. And then instead of writing to them to congratulate them on the week that it premieres, write to them the week of the third episode, you know, when it's going to be cleared out a little bit. And you can even say, you know, I'm sure you've been hearing from everyone, but I've just been so proud of you for this work that you did. And I just wanted to let you know how much I've enjoyed the first 3 episodes, looking forward to the rest, you know, that can be useful. And the best reason for getting in touch with somebody is for no particular reason. Just because you were thinking of them. Because think about the people, how many people, and everyone probably has 2 or 3 people in your life that if you got this email from, you wouldn't like it. But the vast majority of the people in your life, if you just heard, hey, how are you doing? I just saw this TV show that reminded me of this thing that we did. I was just thinking of you and hoping you're doing well. What a nice email to get from almost any person in your life. And you can send that to other people as well. Like that can be really nice. Because also the other thing I will say is I, every year, get the exact same email about 15 times. And it goes like this. Hi, Kit. How are you doing? I saw that you moved to Missouri. I love the pictures of your dogs on Instagram. I hope everything's going great. P.S. I'm applying to grad school next year. Could you write me a letter? Like, sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. But you know what? Those people who I'd heard from 3 times over the last year and then write me and say, can I write you a letter? I'm a lot more excited about writing their letter, frankly. And frankly, I know a lot more about what's going on with them to be able to write them a letter. And honestly, that's actually something I always put in letters if it's true, is this person has kept in touch with me in the 5 years since they were in my class. And it's something when I see it in other people's letters, I take really seriously. You know, it's like, oh, this is, okay, this is somebody who, you know, who keeps on top of their stuff. But, you know, if you're just going to drop someone a letter out of nowhere, I mean, there are exceptions. They keep it short. If this is literally just like, hey, how you doing? Thinking about you. That said, if you see some film that makes you think of a person you worked with 5 years ago that just makes you realize how much you miss working with them and you want to write them a 2-page thing about how much you miss them, like if you're really feeling it, like do your thing. Like if you really mean it, people can fly. But, you know, you want to keep it relatively short. Potentially indirectly reintroduce yourself if necessary. Like this is not your, you know, but somebody who's like, I want to keep in touch with this person and I did a reading with them 4 months ago, you know, and I want to keep in touch with them, you know, to be able to say, to indirectly, you know, it's like, hey, I hope you've been doing well. I enjoyed working with you on this reading so much. Just something that, you know, reminds them just if you think there's any chance they wouldn't remember who you are. Again, be specific, like why, not just, hi, how you doing? Hope everything's good. I mean, okay, but why are you writing to them? Again, preferably anchor it in something. If you can say, I read this article, it made me think about this thing. I just watched the worst production, high school production of Into the Woods you can imagine. It made me remember the production of it we did 3 years ago. You know, whatever it is that you've got that's sort of going to give you a reason for writing is going to be helpful. Give them something if possible, gift them something. And that doesn't mean, again, send them an Amazon gift card. But if you say, I read this article, I thought it was great, it made me think of the thing. I've attached the link to the article. Just to, it's something that's going to give them a connection to give them something. Again, you certainly don't have to do that, but it can be it makes it feel like they're doing something with you, even though you're not in the same room. I think when I originally put this on the slide, I was thinking of something specific, but what's not awesome, and I get these emails from time to time too, is, hey kid, how you doing? I was thinking of you and I hope everything's going well. I was just cast in this blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, you just were writing to me to tell me you were cast in that thing, which like is actually totally cool. Honestly, sometimes I get things, you know, especially like from former trainees and stuff. It says, hey kid, I just wanted to let you know I got cast in this thing. I was so excited. I wanted to tell you. It's like, that's awesome. I'm so glad you wanted to tell me about that. That's awesome. Like, you don't have to hide it in something else. You can just write me to tell me you wanted me to know. That's awesome. You know, so, you know, there's that kind of thing. And also, really importantly, don't ask for it. And this actually, including a response. These things are just sort of just like, I just want to let you know I'm thinking of you. This is one where you don't put a call to action. You know, but just like, I'm not writing for you to any reason other than the fact that I value the fact that you're a person in my life that I was thinking. Because again, that's just a decent thing to do. Like, that's nice to do. You should do that to people who you want to be part of your life. But again, also, if then the third email they get from you does have an ask in it, they'll be much more warm to that than if that's the first time they're hearing from you since the last time something. And again, remind them of your existence. Like that's you know, just that idea. That's basically all you're doing in these things. Is you're a person I want to keep in my orbit. Hi, I'm Mars over here. I'll see you later. You know, that's basically the purpose of these things. And then there are times, again, that sometimes you are sharing your good news. And, you know, that's totally fine. If you've got exciting news and you want to say, hey, I'm excited about sharing this thing, like, do that. You know, also really nice. And, you know, you know, I mean, I think, and again, it's weird. Things I think of is Phil Kenner wrote to me almost 3 years ago at this point, and he was a former apprentice of mine at Cry Havoc. He had just gotten actually like a Rhodes Scholarship, and he was studying playwriting at Oxford as part of this scholarship. And he wrote me a letter that just said, you know, my teacher, my playwriting teacher pulled me aside today and said that I give really sophisticated feedback to my fellow classmates, and I know I learned that from you. Thanks so much. I mean, like, what an amazing, I mean, like, I was flying for a week, you know, after getting that email, because it was just like, what a nice thing to hear that I'm still a part of your life, even when we're not in the same room together. And so, you know, find ways to do that with people. Again, ways to keep in touch: email, calling, writing, texting, social media, meeting up for coffee, going and seeing their work. That's actually a thing that's really appreciated. And as much as we're like here, oh man, I've got to go see 9 to 5 because I should support my friends. Even we want to see 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is wonderful, but yeah. But you think trying to find time to see 3 shows in a semester is a lot? You are going to have 10 shows every week that you feel like you should go see once you move to New York, once you move to Chicago. You know, you're going to have those things, and it's really appreciated when you make it out to see people's things. So just, you know, just realize that. And also, again, remember that. That's a really important and a tricky part of it. Again, the people you've got a longer relationship with, but again, that person you were in a reading with, that person you shot one day on a film with that you bump into in a coffee shop, if you're able to say, hey, Gabriel, how you doing? I haven't seen you since that thing. That's really nice. People like being remembered. I like being remembered. Another just little thing to think about, because it is a little trap I have seen people fall into, which is figuring out how to share a relationship with people. Because sometimes, especially if you're early in your career and you've got a network of people who you're mutually supportive, and then you get a chance to meet with a big-ish film director or that there sometimes can be like, guys, we've hit the jackpot. Is it cool if I bring my 3 friends with me to this meeting we're having? Like, and I'm going to give a caveat to this in a second. But like generally, no. You know, you want to go, you want to build that relationship, and then you can share that relationship. You know, and I always think about it, it's like the, you know, and everyone's like, put on your mask first. You know, that like if you're building a relationship with this person, not to hide it from other people, but to let it actually become a stable relationship before you begin to try to introduce your friends to that person. That said, share those relationships once they're stable. Like you really should. That's a really decent thing to do. But again, I have, you know, again, there are people like I'm meeting, like, oh, cool, can I bring this other friend of mine from class to, you know, and sort of like, fine, but then we end up talking about what their class is like instead of talking about this person's life, which is what we were supposed to do. The caveat to that is just the reality of the way that the world is just to be aware of that the vast majority of times that you are asked to go to a meeting with someone is because they want to meet with you. That said, there are the stories, which are very real, of let's meet for coffee, then texting, actually, why don't we meet at this bar near this hotel I'm staying at? Next text, why don't you just meet me at my room? Just, there are reasons, if you ever feel uneasy about, is this really a meeting or is this a date kind of a thing, that might be a place where, I mean, one, just all the good practices that you have of meeting somebody who you've met online, you know, make sure somebody knows where you are, meet someplace public, all of that kind of stuff, you know, follow those things. And if you're really concerned, I mean, if you're really concerned, don't go. But also that idea of it's like, oh, my roommate is here and is waiting out in the lobby. I'm not trying to invite this person into the meeting, you know, but if it's a meeting in a public place, if it's a meeting at their office, you shouldn't meet with anyone, any place other than those places. But if it's for coffee at a public place, if it's at their office, it's cool. But just, that is a thing to be aware of. And because I do think that this is important about not trying to pile people on, but that doesn't mean you should walk alone into a situation that you feel like might not be a situation you should walk alone into. But that might mean, that just might not be a meeting I take. You know, that's anyway, a thing to think about. And then once you have relationships, like how do you deploy them? Like what do you do with these relationships once you've got them? One, you can use it to get jobs. You know, I mean, that's once you're working with a director, or you get to know a director, you get to know a casting director, you get to know an artistic director, you're able to say, hey, I know you're auditioning for the show. Can you get me in to audition for this thing? Or just, they might say, you know what, I think you'd be great for this thing we're doing later in the season. I'm just going to call you back for it, but you're really the person I've got my eye on. Like that, you know, that can really happen. You can use it to give jobs to people you trust. I mean, the same way we talked about that the people who start off at your level over the time, they're going to become people worth knowing. You're going to become people worth knowing too. And it can be a really nice thing to be able to recommend people for things, to be able to, if you are getting into producing and things like that, to be able to give work to other people. And use it to get recommendations. Who should I get to know about this thing? I'm trying to do this kind of project. What's the good advice we can get from that? You can get that from, but also you can give recommendations. That's actually something that I know is a really helpful thing in my, just in my networking life, army building life in New York. Was I ran a theater company that, one, did a lot of new work development, and two, had a really robust education system. So I became someone that people knew if they were looking for a certain kind of play, I was a person who could give recommendations. If they were looking for talented non-union actors, I was somebody who might have a list of people that they should be looking at. And so like that idea of being able to be a resource for other people is actually a really helpful thing for you to be doing as you're building your career. And as we talked about before, as an ear to the ground. It's just, you're gonna hear what's going on in the business. You're gonna hear about the auditions that not everybody is hearing about. You know, you're gonna hear about those things if you know people. But also, frequently, a well cared for relationship deploys itself. You know, I think about it like somebody says, oh, I'm looking for a new assistant director. It's like, oh, there's this terrific director I had for class 2 years ago, and he's continued to be in touch. He seems to be great. Let me introduce you guys. Like that person never asked for anything, but it was just like, yeah, they're a person I'm aware of, and a person I'm aware of. I'm looking for an opportunity to help, and I think they'd be a good match for this director. Boom, there you go. You make that happen. So again, take care of those relationships, and again, things will just happen for you. Things will just happen for you. Sometimes you can ask for favors. Like that's a thing that you could do. Hey, I need a favor. If you've got a relationship with a person, it's a lot easier to ask a favor of them than if you don't know them. Again, that's, can you get me in for this audition? I have an improv group and we really don't have enough money to rent a rehearsal studio to work in, but I know your theater is empty on Tuesday nights. Could we get in there? Like that's kind of stuff that you can get because you have a relationship with someone. The likelihood of someone who's the artistic director of a theater that you were an intern at and then have worked on 2 shows saying yes to that request, a lot higher than you just dropping a random email to somebody saying, can I use your theater for free on Tuesday nights? But something I find useful is to think about it in the context of the relationship continuum. So like if you're looking for an agent, like that's something that you're thinking about looking for. If you have someone who is like sort of out here, someone you did a reading with a while ago, like maybe the thing that they have an agent, you can ask them to give you advice on what should I be looking for. Like that's really the appropriate thing for someone who you had one day of rehearsal and then did a reading. That's something you could ask them. Somebody who's a little bit further down who you did a whole show with and did a 3-month run of it and really enjoy each other, their agents, like what do you know specific agents you think would be a good match for me? Like, okay, that's something where it takes a little bit more thinking. You're asking them to, kind of scratch around and think. Oh, somebody who's a little bit more regular collaborator, you could say, can you introduce me to your agent? Because that's actually kind of a big ask, frankly. Because again, the same way when we talk about, sharing contacts, basically your agent's job is to know everyone. Like that's basically what their job is. And wouldn't it be nice to introduce every person you know to your agent? But no, you can't. You got to be selective about it. So that's kind of a big ask. Then other people who is like are big people, you might be able to say, I need you to help me find an agent. Somebody you've really got a long-term relationship with, a mentorship relationship with. But it's just that idea that this person you did one reading with, I'm sure would be very glad to help you brainstorm and give you some pointers about what worked for them in their meetings, early meetings with agents and things like that. They're probably not going to introduce you to their agent. They're almost definitely not going to make it a project to get you an agent, but just to be aware, where are you and what's appropriate to ask for them. But one thing that's great is to ask for advice. Almost anyone is willing to give you advice. You like it when people ask you for advice. It means they think you know something about something. So people are generally willing to give advice, but when you ask for advice, you frequently get help instead. Where you say, I really have been looking for an agent, and I know you got one, and I just was wondering, what do you think are good strategies for looking? And they're like, well, this or this or this. You know what, actually, I don't think my agent is a match for you, but there's a guy who works down the hall. You know what, let me talk to my agent and see if he can get you a meeting with them. Like that kind of stuff happens all the time. So don't be afraid to ask people for advice because you kind of never know when they're actually going to give you help. Also, and this is sort of like this at the end of the session, array of random thoughts, which is one, express gratitude to the people who have helped you. One, I think it's a decent and good thing to do, to be gracious and gratitudinous towards people who have done good things for you. But also, it makes them more likely to do other nice things for you. It's like if I set somebody up with an audition, you set somebody up for, say somebody set you up for an audition, and you get the audition and you get the part, and write them a note and say, oh my goodness, thank you so much for, I got this part and I really appreciate how much this happened. You know what? Also, 3 months later, after the show closes, shoot them another email and just say, I just ended this thing. It was such a great experience that I know I wouldn't have gotten it if you hadn't introduced me. Thank you so much. One, decent thing to do. Two, the next time you ask if they can help you get something, they're probably going to be pretty open to it, given how gracious you were about it. But also, you write and say, the show just closed, and I just want to let you know how much I appreciate it. It was a great experience. And they might get that email and go, you know what they'd actually also be great for? I should put them in contact with this other person. Again, so much of networking is actually, again, finding opportunities to remind people you exist in the world. Because people like to help people where they can. And if they, A, don't know you, they can't. And if they've forgotten about you, they can't. So you need to make sure they know who you are and you give them reason to keep remembering that you exist and are a good person. Because that's a really good part of it. One thing that I will, and this is honestly comes from a really personal place from my life, but it's something I know other people do, is one thing that I think people do is like, especially if they're kind of people they want a mentor relationship or have had one, they're like, well, I don't reach out because I don't want to bother them. One, it's always great to hear from people who you have mentored or want to mentor, have that kind of relationship. They always, everyone you have, go home tonight, everybody, and just whoever has been the most important person to you in your career, your high school drama director, whatever, write them an email tonight and just tell them you appreciate what they did for you. They will be so glad to hear from you, even if there's someone who you think will bother them. But I just know there was someone who was incredibly important in my life, really opened every door for playwriting, including telling me I should be writing when he saw a one-act play I wrote on a lark. And he was really, but he also was kind of fancy and had famous friends and was artistic. And so I always felt like I had to have a reason to write to him. And so, and it was something I thought that I would, and so I would, and I, kept thinking I want to talk to Mayor, but I can't, whatever. And then my theater company was kind of giving out an award, and we decided we were going to give the inaugural award for mentorship to the company to him, because there was so much about the way he talked about writing that was part of what we were doing. And I thought, well, in 2 months when we announced it, I'm going to have a great reason to get in contact with him. And then he died. And I never got to tell him about that. And when I was talking to his daughter afterwards, I told him, I said, I went to the service for him, and I said, he was such a wonderful and important person to me. And I wish I'd kept in closer touch. I wanted to, I knew how busy he was and didn't want to bother him. And she said, you're never a bother. I knew every time that you called him because he would tend to that, because he was so upset. And it was just like, anyway, huge mistake in my life. Any opportunity I have to save other people from that, I will do it, because don't be afraid to reach out. People are always glad to hear nice things from people who they think are nice, no matter how fancy they are. So do it. And just the final biggest thought about all of this is the way to build a career and to build a network is, to help other people. That's what you do. People help people who help people. If you can be a resource to the people who are in your like a rising age group, help those people as much as they can. You get an opportunity to be in a room with people who are ahead of you, do whatever you can to help them get their work done as well as you can. It will come back to you. People help people. Be that person, and that's how your career is going to grow up around you. And hopefully what's going to end up happening is this is going to be your army. You're going to have this tight little group of people who are like your brothers and sisters in arms. These are the people who you're going to go to war with. But then you've also got all of these people who like working with you frequently, people who have worked with you and are interested in working with you again, people who've never worked with you but think that you're cool and want to find an opportunity, and then just a bunch of people who know you're out there and know what you do and might need it sometime. But that's how you want your world to look. And the rest of it kind of is going to take care of itself in a lot of ways, if you're able to build a network. Any questions or thoughts or anything like that about any of these things? Because again, I think a lot of people think of like networking as a skill and networking as a skill about gaming the system. It's not, it's a lifestyle. And it's just about be a decent person to the people around you who are trying to pursue the same kind of work you're trying to pursue. That's all we're talking about. And it works out for you. It really does. Awesome. Are there any questions from our friends at home? Okay, then I have one little, sorry, Gabriel, sorry. No, I won't.
Okay. So I do have a question, and it's like right now making connections with older people. Like, yes, we are like technically not children, but I think that like we just were children, and that we me personally, I'm like, I don't know how adults are going to like perceive me, and if they're going to perceive me like as a child, and therefore like I guess what I'm trying to say is like I guess like certain adults like want children to behave in a certain way, and so I think that when I'm like I guess when I'm like talking to someone like that is that is like your age, you know what I mean? Like I don't
An
think I
old
would
person, yeah.
speak to them. I don't think I would speak. I don't think I would speak to them in the way that I would speak to Kat, right? Which is like fine, great, but it's also like because of like me and Kat don't have this like language barrier. I'm able to make a better connection to Kat, and so I guess my question is, how do I make the connections to people of like older age that I could make with like Jocelyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of thoughts I had about that. I'm not sure I have the answer to it, but I have some thoughts about it. Which is one, again, part of it is working your way across here. That there's going to be a point at which you're able to, somebody you've gotten to know reasonably well, you can talk to them however you want to talk to them. And frankly, you can talk to anyone however you want to talk to them. But it's also sort of like I'm going in for a first meeting with someone. It's like, well, I mean, frankly, I would suspect, and maybe I'm wrong, but if you went to grad school after this, your first day of school, if Kat was a classmate of yours and you had never met her before, you probably wouldn't talk to her the way you talk to her.
Yeah.
And I think there's just a little bit of, it's just kind of basic social, we're feeling each other out and we're sort of, not giving ourselves a bottled version of ourselves, but I've got this certain kind of sense of humor. I get people don't get as funny if they don't know me. So I don't tell that kind of joke until they get to know me better. Like we all have those sort of barometers, and that's all. I honestly don't think you need to worry about thinking about them as older people, because it's an interesting thing in this business that for the most part, like if you're a lawyer, the 25-year-old who's working at your office is going to be a pretty low-level person by definition. That's not the case in our business. There are shows that need 23-year-olds in them, and that's the lead in the show. And, that people are pretty accustomed to having colleagues that are of all sorts of different ages. So I think there's nobody who you're going to be dealing with who hasn't interacted with people who are your age and like you many, many times. So I think part of it is just sort of trying to get rid of that mental barrier of it. But also, like, people also get it. Like, people get it. People who are, 22 and right out of school kind of are in a different place with, the way they're interacting with the world, and people get it. Like, and a lot of people enjoy it. It's sort of like I like the energy of young people and, things like that. That a lot of people really like having that around. And, but if I remember, I'll say that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it felt like it did. Oh. Any other questions about things like that? Oh, I remember what it was. No, about also just realizing, it goes back to the thing about realize the place that you fit into the world. Because part of it is you are a young person. And I know it was a thing, Cry Havoc had a bunch of apprentices who were from Yale. And one of the things that I found, and kids who are in Yale, the kids are like that's the gold standard if you want to go to a school about being smart. Like, they're doing that. But one of the things that I found, I had exactly the same conversation with every Yalie that we had, which was this. You talk about something, they would go on at length and detail and incredible thoughtfulness about whatever the thing is we were talking about. And then at the end go, but what do I know? I'm 19. And I do think that there's just sort of a little, that's incredibly endearing to be like, yeah, that's super smart. And yeah, you're going to learn a lot more stuff. Yeah, that's true. And the fact that you are acknowledging that is kind of an amazing thing. And so I do think that there's something about realizing that, yeah, I'm someone at the start of their career. This is the stuff I've got. I feel good about it. I feel proud of the things that I do and can do. And I'm also aware I'm going to be much better at what I do 5 years from now. I'm going to know much more about what's going on 5 years from now. So A, I'm ready to deliver what I've got now, and B, I'm eager to learn more. That's a really appealing thing about a young person, who's able to, to again, have confidence in what they've already got and awareness that they're still looking to build on. So, that might be part of it. Anything else? All right, I'm going to, because something occurred to me that I think would be a useful little assignment for you guys to do next week. It's little. It will require a little bit of thought, but it literally is one sentence. I'm going to ask you to upload to Moodle, which is, because this can be a useful thing for you as you're going out in the world and networking. What's happening? You guys saw this working this whole time, right? All right, just what is the most interesting fact about you as a professional actor at this point? Not what do you really like, not what do you, but like what is a true fact about you that if you said to someone, if you met them at a party, would make them want to talk to you longer to find out more about that thing? Stuff related to the business. Like mine, I will say now, and has been for a while, I'm the only playwright ever to have been produced on all 7 continents in their lifetime. Like, that is true. You say that to someone, they're like, I need to know more about that story. You've got them locked in for 5 minutes. Yeah, for 5 minutes. And also, I know the other parts of the story I tell that tells them other stuff that I want them to know about. For a while, it was honestly not my favorite project at all that I worked on, but I wrote the book to a rock musical adaptation of The Hobbit, which was a thing I did. But you know what? I did that when I was your age. And it was still kind of a thing I would pull out for people when I was 30, because it was a kind of thing that people would be like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? So think about yourself. And again, not what is an idea, but like what is a true fact about you that you think is the most interesting thing that you could tell someone that would open up a bigger discussion. There's also possible that there's facts about you that are not related to the profession that would open that. And that's also useful to think about too. But again, for this is something related to work that you've done or whatever. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, thank you, everybody.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kit.
Thank you. Have a good day and a good weekend. And good luck to everyone in 9 to 5.
Mm.
Hate that costume. Hate the teddy bear head. Hate it. Don't like it. Ugh. Sure, it looks great. I just